Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the CMT webinar series. And tonight's webinar, I'd like to invite you all to listen in. This is going to be an audio-only webinar, and a dynamically audio-only webinar, I might say. And so with us tonight is Jonah Berger, and he is going to be talking about a number of different things. Everything from finding the positive aspects of facing life with a challenge and the wisdom he's gained from having CMT himself. And as I just told him, he's the only other person I've met on the planet with CMTX, much like myself. So for you guys out there with CMTX, it's something we all share in common there. So tonight's webinar will probably go about 40-45 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions. A couple of housekeeping issues. In the lower right corner of the panel, you'll see a place where you can ask questions. Please bring them into me at any time during the broadcast, and I'll make sure that they get to Jonah. And if you have any questions for me, you can always hit me up in the chat window, which is also in the lower right corner of the panel there. So having said that, I'd like to turn it over to tonight's presenter, Jonah Berger. Jonah?
Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate being called dynamic any day of the week. Hello, everyone across the country, fellow funny-feeted people and normal-footed people who have a concern for us funny-feeted people. Welcome to everyone. I'm just really honored to be a part of this series ongoing, and it's such a treat to be able to share thoughts and stories with you all and to hear your questions. I'm humbled by the opportunity to be a part of it. So thank you for prioritizing an hour of your day to listen to me ramble on. And few kind of housekeeping things on my end as well. I really want to encourage questions. I think it's a really important thing that this be a dialogue. That's why I don't have slides for you to look at. This is just about me talking and you guys talking at me and me answering your questions. So as I'm speaking, by all means, if you have any questions whatsoever, type them into Bob, and I'll be sure to leave at least 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions, to give you food for thought on them. If by any chance you have a question that is pertinent to something I'm saying and you really want it answered right there in the moment, that is totally fine. Just make sure to write something along those lines to Bob saying, ask Jonah right now, please, blah, blah, blah. Let us see. I'm going to be myself. I guess that's just the best way to put it. I try very hard not to get nervous and different about these things. I just try to be who I am normally and talk to you like I would if we were at a coffee shop. So that comes along with not being perfectly prepared, not being perfectly professional sounding at all times. That comes along with the fact that my dog Banjo might bark in the middle of our discussion. So let us embrace these little picadillies as components of the organic experience of conversation, so to avoid that striving for the fake and kind of prepared webinar vibe. Let's have an authentic one. That being said, let's go ahead and jump in. I would like to start with a quote from Socrates that I came across recently. And this quote is really perfect for this webinar because I am hoping that this webinar takes you from wherever you are now to a higher level, a deeper level, a grander level of acceptance of the challenge, and even more so, celebration of your challenge. Don't adjust your speakers. I meant what I said, celebration of our challenge. So along those lines, the quote is such: the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So I just want to throw that out from Socrates because I think it's really important that no matter how you have embraced your path with CMT thus far, no matter how long that path has been, be it a couple days old or several years or decades old, I want you to believe in the fact that you can change your attitude at any time. and that you have that power. I think that's probably the overarching message of my presentation tonight, is that you get to be the determinant factor in how this challenge goes for you. You get to be, not CMT, but you. And so I guess to sum it up in advance, I would just encourage you to open your eyes and minds to the idea of celebrating this experience a little bit. And let us go into looking at how. A little bit of overview on myself. My name is Jonah Berger. I am 43 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado. I am a small business owner. I run a business called The Rhythm Within, and I work with kids and adults with various special needs, working on independent skills and social skills and community access and things like that. I do a drumming program in the public school system in Denver, working on special needs and the concept that everyone has special needs, and learning to appreciate everyone's rhythm. And I am an author of a book called He Walks Like a Cowboy. It is available on Amazon.com. You just type in Jonah Berger or He Walks Like a Cowboy, and you should be able to find it. I don't promote the book, I hope you know, out of desire to make sales, because in the 9 years that the book has been out, it has not paid for my vacation fund as of yet. But I promote the book because I believe it to be a good tool to help you have someone who understands exactly where you are and has put it into words, and also help you explain to other people the path of those who walk with CMT. So if you're so inspired and haven't yet, feel free to check out He Walks Like a Cowboy. I have CMTX, as Bob said. From what I'm to understand, the third or fourth most common type of CMT. The big picture is not too shabby. I wear leg braces, AFOs, on both legs since I was 22. My hands are weak and weaker with time, for sure. Fine motor is difficult for me. But with perseverance and with stubbornness, I get through my days pretty well. I'm extremely busy and successful at being busy, and have had far more pieces of wisdom come my way than pieces of misery from this challenge with CMT. So that's who I am. I would say, as a precursor to this whole philosophy of being positive about your challenges, that it's really important to note the source of my positivity. And the source of my positivity is my mother, Marilyn Berger, who also has CMTX, and has taught me my entire life, even before I had full grasp of what it was going to mean for me, how to live with CMT. She taught me very clearly through action, not often through words, but always through action, that she was going to be in charge of CMT and not the opposite. She was by far one of the busiest, probably still is, one of the busiest mothers of anyone I know. Deals with pain, deals with frustration, but gets it out and moves on from it, doesn't dwell on it, and doesn't carry it around as an extra weight. And she is, just by all accounts, the biggest champion I have ever come across in regards to facing challenge with class and with grace and with toughness. And so if there is anything in my presentation or my style or my words that speak to you or impress you, then I want it to be made very clear that I am merely the verbalization of a lesson that I received from my mom. So much love to Marilyn. Let's see. So I would also say that the other kind of blessing of the work that I do is that I get to work with a lot of clients who all face challenges, be them mental, be them emotional, be them physical. And it is just amazing how every day that I work with these guys, I get a reminder from them without them meaning to remind me of the importance of positive attitude. I'll give you the most obvious example, which was recently. I was working with a client of mine named Ander, and Ander has Asperger's syndrome and is extremely intelligent and extremely socially awkward and has a lot of trouble connecting to other people. And I took him over to visit another client of mine named Eric. And Eric has cerebral palsy and pretty severe. And he's in a wheelchair and has a trach tube for his breathing, a G tube for his eating. I'm going to pause once in a while to take a drink of water to keep the throat good to go. So if you hear a quick pause, don't worry. Anyway, I took Ander over to meet Eric just because I like to introduce my clients to each other whenever possible. And we all hung out for a while. Eric is just an inspiration. He's just a source of sunshine. And when we left Eric's house, Ander and I were driving home, and Ander said to me, you know, I bet a lot of people would think of Eric as disabled. And I said, okay, what makes you say that? And he said, well, you look at his physicality and you would assume he's disabled, but I don't think he is. And I said, okay, why don't you think he is? And he said, well, he said it very matter-of-factly, which I was just very touched by. He said, well, disabled means not facing your challenges. And Eric's facing them every day, so I don't think of him as disabled. And I thought it was just a beautiful example of Ander, first of all, and second of all, of how much meaning is tied to perspective. How you look at something is how it comes, and that's a really important power to keep in mind. So cheers to Ander for that one. I want to tell you a story about something personal that happened to me over a year ago professionally. I was working as the program director at the Easter Seals of Colorado camp, the summer camp up in the mountains of Colorado. I'd been there for about 2 years and invested my heart and soul and 100% of my energy into that role. I worked harder at that job than I think I've ever worked in my entire life. And the majority of people that I worked with at camp received that work really well, and I had a good working relationship with my boss, and things were just pretty strong after 2 years. Well, the higher-ups at the larger organization of Easter Seals, Colorado, that are down in the Denver metro area, did not see things the same way, and they go through program directors pretty quickly up there, and after 2 years decided that it was time to move on to someone with new and fresh perspective. This was communicated to me on a Monday morning. It was communicated to me by surprise. I had no kind of warning that it was coming, and I was given 4 days to pack up my stuff because I lived at the camp and move out. And so I had no job as of 4 days from then. I had no place to live, and I had no plan as to what was going to be next for me. And I don't tell you this story out of a pity party for my situation at camp, because I still go up to that camp. I still love everyone there. It's not about what happened at camp. It's about what happened the night that I got fired. And I came home from the meeting at the head office, and I sat down at my desk, and I put my head in my hands, and I remember thinking to myself, I have every reason in the world right now to completely flip out, to 100% lose my cool. Not over getting fired, but over the fact that I had to pack my entire life, move to a new location that I had no idea what it was, and figure out a way to find a new job and make money in 4 days. And for whatever reason, I can't necessarily tell you why, but that night, different than any other unexpected bad news that I had gotten in the past, I made a conscious decision to try it the other way than I had always done it. Usually I would flip out. Usually I would react. Usually I would lose my cool. And this time I sat there that night and I said, you know what? This is so obvious to lead to that end result. I'm going to try to challenge my typical process and do it the other way. And I made a conscious decision that night to just stay cool, to have faith that whatever was going to be was going to be. And that's exactly what I did. And, you know, flash forward about a year and a half later, almost 2 years later, I can tell you now that I don't tell you this story out of any other reason but to help you understand that the experience of moving on into the next chapters of my life, of which I had no idea what they were, was incredibly positive, was profoundly life-changing. I have been happier in the last year and 3/4 than I have been in my entire life. It is because I stayed cool, in my opinion, that it went cool, that I relaxed my mind. Instead of tightening it up, I opened it up. Instead of tightening up my reactions, I opened my mind and my reactions, and the amount of good things that came my way that were unexpected, that helped me piece together the next chapters of my life that have gotten me to where I am now, which is on top of the world, are profound. And why I tell you this story is that I learned from that experience. The most unexpected big change that had ever been thrust my way in my life, that how you deal with it is how it will go. Had I melted down that night, had I freaked out and lost my cool, I think things would have gone drastically different for me in the last year and 3/4. And so my long-winded point in telling you this story is to remind you that you have that control. This is going to be a repetitive point, but there's a reason, is that the more you practice setting the bar of how something will be with attitude and with perspective, the more you see that that's a muscle, like any muscle, that the more you work it, the stronger it becomes. And you can get to the point that you actually feel behind the wheel of your own life, as opposed to the receiver of circumstances beyond your control. So, food for thought. The next topic that I would cover in regards to the overall idea of a silver lining around this thing that we all deal with is the profound nature of communicating with others. If you communicate with others, if you share with others what you're going through, if you learn to be open about it, the feeling of positivity is so much more easily attained. If you bottle it up, and if you hold it to yourself, and if you assign negativity and judgment to it, especially by being embarrassed or uncomfortable to talk to others about it, then you will find that the hardships grow, that the weight of those hardships increases. And so I just want to continue to encourage you all in any way that I possibly can to be open, to speak about it as much as possible in any situation as possible. And if someone, by any chance, doesn't receive it well, that's them. That's not you. That's not for you to worry about. So I, again, was taught that by my mom and have experienced the positive impact that comes from learning to be open, to the degree that I ended up on the advisory board and am talking to strangers across the entire country about the most personal things I go through, because I have seen how much positivity comes, not just for the people you're being open to, but to yourself. My experience of having CMT has become a positive because I treat it as such by the way that I communicate as easily about it to other people as I would how my day was, or as I would what it's like to be tall, or so on. So again, long-windedly, let me boil it down for you. Talk to other people. Learn to be open. Get through those awkward first few times, and you will find that it gets easier with time, and you will also find that the more you talk about it to other people, the better it feels for yourself. To this point, I will read you a very short 2-page chapter from my book. It's chapter 6. It's called The Learning to Be Open. Although my mom kind of set the bar for me, it was my friend Jason Kahn who helped me hammer it home of really learning to be open with other people. So the chapter goes like this. In a lifetime of amazing influences and terrific people crossing my path, it is interesting how a handful stand out. Some are due to a long-term and profound connection. Others are the result of a pure and true moment that stay with you for the rest of your path. A moment that burns into your soul and serves as one of the roots of an ever-growing tree. I met Jason Kahn in the summer of 1987. While we would go on to enjoy many years of friendship and connection that still exists today, the impact that Jason had on my life most powerfully began that first summer at the age of 15. We ended up in the summer camp together at Camp Ramblewood in Darlington, Maryland. This is the age when boys are at their peak of their ridiculousness. Young, immature, and self-involved, combined with just enough years and ability to get into all sorts of trouble. The high point of the 15-year-old's annual spirit explosion is the summertime. I spent all of my summers in camp. It was my favorite place. I was free in camp. I was devoid of any and all responsibility, and I marked that summer as the year I went from a kid to a teen. My eye for the fairer sex was really starting to come into focus. I entered camp that year ready to experiment, ready to laugh, and ready to celebrate the end of another year of schooling. Enter Jason Kahn, the perfect co-pilot for this camp season, a cool cat in every sense of the word. He was smooth and funny, and we made instant partners in crime. He was a good friend to have at 15. I also entered the summer at an interesting point in the development of my disability. I was starting to weaken in my legs and feet. I was starting to walk a little differently than a normal teenage boy, yet it was nothing drastic and very easily ignored by others and by myself. I hadn't expected to challenge my personal comfort level with CMT at that point. It was always a struggle I assumed I would face in the years to come, but had yet to feel really ready to face it. I had certainly not yet experienced the ability to let others into my private well of emotion surrounding my disability. I relied on a steady diet of ignorance and denial. As the summer wore on, I realized that I was not as able as I had been in past summers. I was stumbling more often. I was losing my balance for lesser reasons than I had before. I felt the struggle starting to set in. I took solace in the accepted teen role in that of the awkward and unathletic. Until one afternoon, late in the summer, Jason and I were walking across this field at our camp, and we decided to sit down and relax a bit. I remember sitting in the afternoon sun laughing about one thing or another when out of the blue Jason asked me, "Why do you walk the way you do?" The question caught me off guard. It's not that I had never bore witness to the stare of others or the laughing when I would trip and fall. It's just that in that very moment I understood that Jason knew something bigger was going on. In the moment, in the most incredible way, he was cutting right to the chase. He wanted to know what was up with me. To my surprise in that moment, and in retrospect ever since, I started right into it. I decided not to think and simply to answer. I decided to be honest for the absolute first time with any friend I had ever had. I told Jason that I had a disability. I told him that it was most commonly tied to a form of muscular dystrophy. I told him that it was hereditary and that it was passed down to me through my mom's side of the family. The more I talked, the easier it came, but I never looked at Jason. I simply looked straight ahead. I told him that it was progressive. I told him that the stumbling and tripping he had noticed was the intensifying of the disease. I told him that I was quiet about it because I didn't think anyone our age would understand. And I remember telling him that I hated having it, that it sucked for me to trip and to have to fight for normal balance. I realized after 2 or 3 minutes that Jason hadn't said anything, so I turned around to look at him. He was crying. This 15-year-old kid was crying for me. He had listened to what I had said and was so taken by it that he was moved to tears. I couldn't believe it. It was the boldest act of teen honesty and vulnerability that I would ever witness. He told me that he was sorry I had to deal with it. He let me in on how much he could tell something was going on. He told me that he was really glad I had told him. The feeling of opening up about it and the reception I got in return can only best be described as cool water. I was light as a feather. My disability was light as a feather. I was released from a self-imposed chain. I remember the feeling of happiness in that instant. I literally remember how it felt. It was in that moment that I learned the most valuable lesson I could have learned about dealing with my disability. The lesson was that to try and hide something that can't be hidden is a false pursuit. Those with a keen eye and a true heart are going to know that something is wrong with me. And to allow for that, to let others in, to squelch their assumptions and their assessments with true and direct knowledge was going to be the quickest path to comfort for myself and those around me. It was going to allow me to focus my energy on dealing with my disability, not hiding from it. Jason and his reaction to my confession solidified my understanding of this concept. In looking back on that moment, I often think two things. One, what if I had chosen a lesser friend to open up to for the first time? What if I was received with laughter or discomfort or a change of subject? It could have easily sent me in the other direction, one of closeted emotions and reserved acceptance. And two, I thank God that it was Jason Kahn sitting there. I thank God that Jason was such an amazing kid with a righteous wisdom and maturity well beyond his years. Don't get me wrong, Jason was every bit as harsh and immature and self-involved as the rest of our friends that summer. Yet he had a side to him that I was lucky to know. And he showed that side of him at a moment that left me forever changed for the better. Since that day, I've always strived to be the person I was on that field, to be open, to be forthright and honest, to let people in and therefore to let myself out of the pressure of concealing the inconcealable. I'm going to repeat that for effect. Out of the pressure of concealing the inconcealable, beyond the great weight of carrying the burden of CMT by myself, and out of the shame that attaches to anything you decide needs to be kept a secret. Jason freed me that day. Jason helped me to free myself. The amount of physical and emotional support I have received from friends over the years as a result of letting them in is simply immeasurable. Never underestimate the power of a single moment. I'm going to take a drink. So that story is, I guess, hoping to hammer home the idea that no matter what your current comfort level with sharing with other people, challenge it. Take it farther. How far is up to you, but farther is what I'm asking. A side concept that I have learned over the years, and that has brought me a immeasurable amount of peace in my soul, is the idea of focusing on the things that are in your control and letting go of the things that are out of your control. We don't have control over the fact that we have CMT. We don't have control over the effect that that has on our bodies. We have absolute and total control on the attitude and perspectives we attach to it. So my point to you is do your best in any moment of frustration to identify what is it you're frustrated about. What is it that you're getting upset about? And when you identify what it is, ask yourself, is that something that's in my control or not? And if it is not in your control, then let it go. As my girlfriend's father would say, let go of the rope instead of participating in the tug of war. Simply let go of the rope. This, like anything, is a practice. This, like anything, gets stronger the more you do it. But I'm telling you, as a seasoned veteran of this concept, it works. If the thing that I'm upset about is in my control, then I get to work on using that control to change the direction of it to a positive direction. But if I'm not in control of the thing I'm most upset about, I give myself a cry, I give myself a kick of a wall, I give myself a few moments of frustration, and then I let it go. So Godspeed in doing that. In the big picture of positivity, see the disability as a blessing. See it as a blessing. I have a short list, but I think the most summative list of the reasons why I see it as a blessing. I am a more sensitive man by leaps and bounds than I would be without CMT. I remember myself as an early teenager before CMT had really started to affect my outward presence. And while I think I always had a good heart, I know that I was not always the nicest person and not always super nice to other people. And I can see now in retrospect that the weaker I became from CMT, the kinder I became to others. Because I am so dependent on other support of my weakness, I am the first in line to support someone else for theirs. And that quality is a rare treat in this world, and I think it's contagious. So the more we do it, the more people want to do it. And I know that CMT is the #1 reason why I do it as much as I do. So that to me is an absolute gift, a silver lining of the highest quality. The connection to others, like I said, because there are things that I need from other people. I was getting ready for a wedding once, and I had to wear a tuxedo, and I couldn't get that top button, but I could barely get the other buttons buttoned, but the top one is the hardest, as you gentlemen will probably know, and tying the tie was a complete joke. And so I went down to my front door man in my apartment building. His name was Ted, and was standing before him, unbuttoned and in need, and said, Ted, here's the deal. I have a disability called CMT. I can't button this thing or tie my tie. For the next 5 minutes, Ted took care of it. I'm sorry, it was Fred. It was Fred. I knew that Ted didn't sound right. Fred, the doorman, spent the next 5 minutes finishing buttoning me, tying my tie, helping me hammer home the details of my tux. And forevermore, I had a connection to Fred that probably everyone else in the building did not have. It's things like that, moments like that, that allow you that insight to other people. Humility. Humility is something that I am the first to admit that I have not always had in great quantity. I am quick to celebrate my positive qualities, but I will say that where it counts the most, CMT has made me humble. CMT has made me appreciative of my need of other people. CMT has made me extremely appreciative of the areas in which I can help other people. I think it's a major reason why I went into the profession that I went into, is that I was gifted the opportunity to see the value of people helping other people because people were helping me. And so whenever possible, I try to help other people in ways that I am able, and that is a beautiful silver lining. An interesting silver lining was Jody Brown. Jody Brown was my girlfriend in camp right around the time that I was speaking about before with Jason Kahn. I dated Jody for one summer. I was about 15 or 16. And one of the things that stands out to me about Jody, who A, to her credit, was young, and B, to her credit, had very little direct feedback from me about the experience of having CMT. One night we were going to the camp dance, and everyone in our camp dressed up big time for the camp dance. It was kind of the big deal of each week. And so I put on all my nice clothes, and I'm walking up to the dance, and I get about 20 feet from the front door of the building where the dance was. It was called the Barn. And everyone was like hanging out outside and waiting to go in, and Jody was about 10 feet away from me and looking at me, and I was walking towards her, and I tripped, as I, and I'm sure we often do, on nothing more than my own toe. I tripped, and I fell down, and the bottom half of me went into a mud area, and a couple people came over to help me, and as soon as I got my bearings, I looked up and realized that none of them were Jody Brown. Jody was still standing 10 feet away and laughing. And I remember that moment because even though I was young, I remember in the reflecting of that later that evening thinking to myself, I guess as a result of having CMT, I'm not going to be able to date just anyone. I'm not going to be able to allow just anyone into my heart. I'm going to have to raise the bar. I'm going to have to be with someone who has an extraordinary ability to be sensitive, ability to be supportive, ability to help and love someone who's facing their own challenges. And long path made short, long story short, enter Megan, my girlfriend now, who is the finest example of all those things I'm talking about that I could ever hope to ask for. And the reason, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons that I ended up with someone as high quality as Megan, as caring and loving as Megan, and as completely embracing of my disability as Megan, is because of CMT. If it weren't for CMT, and if it weren't for the funky reactions I got from some females over the years, I don't think I would have raised that bar as high as I did. And because I raised it that high, A, I was single till 42, and B, I've ended up with someone who makes me smile literally on a daily basis because she's of the highest quality. That I attribute, yes, to my heart, but I also attribute it to CMT because it gave me the lens with which to find the right match, the absolute right match. And if that's not the biggest silver lining of CMT, I don't know what is. The other piece that I would say is, I'm going to read you one other part of the book. It's a very brief part as well. I'm flipping to it as we speak. I call this chapter X-ray vision. And the reason I call it X-ray vision is because that, in my opinion, is, I think, the biggest silver lining is to be able to see past people's surface and into their soul. Because most people that I've met with CMT or that deal with any profound challenge in their day-to-day life, they don't have as much surface level. They have no choice but to live honestly. And I think the people who go through that are able then to look at other people and see through to their honesty. And I call that long-winded concept X-ray vision. Chapter 7. There is a certain mentality I've seen in those who deal with any kind of struggle in life, a tool that is used to handle and deal with this struggle. It is the attempt and eventual success of trying to see the good in the struggle. One attempts to identify the pieces or results of that struggle that are good, that are beneficial. Does it make that struggle disappear? No. Yet I have found that this mentality helps to put the struggle into a better perspective, or at least a more palatable one. In regards to this philosophy, several positive results stand out. As a result of my disability, I am an inherently sensitive man. I have very little choice but to be concerned for the struggles of others because I have relied so much on their concern for mine. My disability has given me the desire to see others' struggles and to help them to minimize them. I have learned to take my familiarity with pain and use it to empathize with others. My disability has taught me humility, at least in the physical sense. I have learned to appreciate the strength through a perspective impossible to possess without a disability. I must say that one of my favorite silver linings is what I call X-ray vision. Throughout my life with a disability, I have noticed a wide variety of reactions towards me. Those that stare and don't say a word, those that stare and say a word, those who are uncomfortable when I actually bring it up, those who are varying degrees of uncomfortable when I bring it up, when I don't bring it up, and so on. Yet the one common denominator that ties these various reactions together is that my disability allows me to see people's reactions. It allows me to see people's hearts. It allows me to see people's strengths and weaknesses in dealing with me. It allows me X-ray vision into one part of who they are. Once those around me become aware of my condition, be it stranger or friend, I am able to sense a bit about the character of that person, as if my disability were an instant X-ray into who they are. I've become better over the years at using that X-ray as well. At first, it was like a new power I did not yet know how to use. For example, I used to judge a quiet response to my disability or disclosure of my disability as a lack of concern or feeling about it. Yet those quiet people are often the ones who later lend me assistance on a hike or similar challenge without using their words. It taught me that some people would rather show their support through action. Enter Brant Lewis, my shining example of the X-ray at work. In my later summers at Camp Ramblewood, when I was about 17 or 18 and now a counselor for the camp, I met Brant Lewis. Brant was also a counselor at Ramblewood. He was from Arizona and a truly interesting guy. Brant was also a very good-looking guy, and he was fully aware of this. As a result of being a good-looking guy, Brant was used to having his way with women. He was a player from start to finish. He was on his game all of the time, and after a few summers at Ramblewood, Brant developed a reputation that was less than favorable. He was kind of a jerk. He very rarely spoke with sincerity and very rarely treated women, or men for that matter, with a great deal of respect. Brant was in it for Brant, or so it would seem. For whatever combinations of reasons, I always got along with him. I liked Brant. He made me laugh, and I did the same in return. And I wasn't a woman, so he had very little reason to piss me off. By the last summer that Brant and I were at camp together, he and I had talked a small amount about my disability. Nothing of major substance, but it is fair to say that he was aware of my condition. Each night of camp, after the kids had gone to sleep, a quarter of the staff would stay back to look after them. That left 3/4 of the staff free to go out to the local town bar and get drunk enough to forget we were child care workers. When the kids were asleep, those who were bar-bound would gather and walk up to the parking lot together. It was dark at this point, and to get to the parking lot, we had to walk up a long hill and cross a small field. The trick with this journey was crossing that small field. It was no more than about 200 yards across, but it was made of uneven ground, filled with craters and dips, and to make it really interesting, it was completely overgrown with tall grass, allowing no vision as to where the dips and holes were located. It was a disabled person's minefield. Let's just say that for a person with my condition, walking across that field in the dark was not my favorite thing to do. For the most part, I was still in the phase of my journey where I kept my fear and discomfort to myself. I didn't want to be seen as different. I would dread that field as it approached, and when the group would start walking across it, I would simply slow down a bit and take it at the most normal pace my fear and feet could muster. Except for the nights when Brant and I were both part of the bar-bound crew. On those nights, it looked something like this. The group of about 25 staff would be walking up the hill and laughing, and when we got to the edge of the field, the group would keep walking at their pace, barely noticing that they had entered the pothole field of doom. Except that Brant, each night that he was with the group, would always slow down a bit at the edge of the field and subtly position himself about 1 foot ahead of me. He would never look back or speak a word, but he just walked ahead of me with his hand out behind him. This guy, this player who had very little respect for women, a guy most people had written off as a total asshole, was the one member of that whole group who never missed a chance to be my guide through that field. Most nights we would walk across the field just fine, me uneasy and Brant with his hand behind him. But when I would stumble or my foot would land in one of those invisible holes, I would grab his hand to keep me from falling, and he would be right there for me. I don't think anyone else in the group ever noticed that this went on, but I did. I have never forgotten it. It is a glowing example of the X-ray factor. As a result of my disability, as a result of having CMT, I was able to see a side of Brant, a side of his truest heart, that most people never would have seen and probably wouldn't have thought existed. I was fortunate to have that vision of him. He is a good guy who made a lifelong impression on me. There have been countless others who have helped me in this way over the years, countless others who have lended me a hand or an ear without me ever having to ask for it. I use my X-ray vision in all of those moments to see into the true heart of people, and more times than not, I see only good things. I think we live in a world where we hear way too much about the negative side of humanity and not enough about the positive, and I think that one of the coolest silver linings of having CMT or any challenge in your life is that you have basically the opportunity to see past the surface, to see the best in people, and to see a side of people that, unless you had something like that, most people would never even know it existed. I see the first question. Do I have a Twitter account? I do not. I do not tweet, but I'm old school, and you can have my cell phone number and find me on Facebook and holler at me anytime. we can have live tweeting. I'll take a pause for a question, but I want to encourage all of you, please, to start thinking of any questions that you have, because I've got about 5 or 6 more minutes, and then I'll wrap up and answer any questions you have. This question says, how do you open up to people about CMT? I am always trying to fit in. That's a very, very good question. And I think the answer looks a little bit different for each person. I think you have to find your way of opening up to people. My way as a Jewish talking man is to talk. That's how I'm comfortable. I was raised by a camp director, and I've gone on to become a camp director myself, and so I'm pretty extroverted and find most of my connectivity through verbal and energetic in-person connection. So for me, that's the most comfortable way, is whenever I start a new staff for a new camp that I'm directing, I always sit them down at the beginning of each summer and tell them about CMT. When I go on a trip, I did a World Peace program with kids and would travel around the world with groups of kids. When we would get to our destinations, I would always sit down with the entire group and explain my CMT. If anyone asks me, stranger or a friend, I explain it to them. That's what works for me. I would say you have to find what works for you. Maybe it's writing. Maybe you blog about it if you're not as comfortable talking in person. Maybe you contact the local newspaper and you offer them a story about yourself as a human interest piece if you're a writer. Maybe if you are more computer savvy and you want to come up with a PowerPoint or a video about your experience with it and float it out there on Facebook or social media, maybe that's the way you do it. I think the bottom line is less so how you do it, more so that you do it. I wore long pants for most of my young adult life because I was embarrassed of my leg braces. In the middle of humid Maryland summers, I was in long pants and jeans sweating my butt off. One time a counselor, when I moved out to Colorado, one of my first camps that I directed, a counselor asked me, "Why do you always wear pants? It's hot out here." And I explained to her that I was honest with her, that I was uncomfortable with it. And she said, "Dude, why don't you give it a try sometime?" And about a week later, I decided to wear shorts for basically the first time in the summer ever since I had gotten braces. She came up to me and said, "Nice job, man," patted me on the back, and that was all she said all day. But it was a real encourager. And so part of it is give it a try. Throw yourself out there a little bit. You never know what will happen. So there's one other question, but I'll come back to that after the end of my presentation. I just have a couple more things to share with you. One is the concept that I talk about with kids all the time, but I think it's really important to talk to adults about it as well. It's the concept that everyone has special needs. Try your best to get rid of the false perception that because you have this organized disability with a title and it affects you in obvious ways that people can actually see with their eyes, that somehow you are any different than anyone else. You're not. You're quite the same as everyone else. And those people that you would call normal, I guarantee you have things in their life that are challenging them. Even if you can't see them with your eyes, they're in there. They have their challenges. And they, as much as we do, need understanding and need empathy and need love and support around it. Those are needs that everyone has based on their individuality. We all have needs that are special to ourselves. That is what special needs are. And by the concept that every single person in this world has those needs, in my opinion, it's important to reinforce the concept that everyone has special needs. Everyone has special needs, not just us. Keep that in mind. Most people, when you're getting ready to talk about it, you're nervous of people's reaction, but most people are more nervous than you are. They see something's going on. They see that we walk different, and they actually want to know. As humans, we are naturally curious. That's why kids are amazing. They never question it. They come right up and they look at my brace and they say, "Why do you wear those?" And I've even had parents of those kids sometimes say, "Don't say that. That's rude." And I always say, no, that's great. Like, let them be curious. Let them feed their curiosity, because then they get their answers. Then they are no longer ignorant, which is lack of knowledge. Then they move on. Kids accept my disability as soon as I explain it to them. They barely ever see it after that. Whereas if people kind of keep it to themselves, it makes it 10 times bigger. So be honest. I will wrap up with two things. I'll wrap up with one, and that could be the end if we have enough questions. If not, then I have one other thing. It's a quote from the movie A Beautiful Mind. And I just love that movie. I always have. I've probably seen it about 5 or 10 times. And there's this quote, and the guy he plays in that movie just passed away, actually, a couple weeks ago. There's a quote in the movie that has stuck with me ever since. It is, I'll paraphrase because I always get a little wrong, but basically the quote goes like this. Isn't it the case with our fears and our joys? You have to feed them to keep them alive. And I love that quote just because it's so true. It's as if to say whatever you choose to feed will stay alive. Whatever you starve will die. Meaning, if you feed your fears, if that's what you choose to give your energy to and your mental focus on, they continue to grow. They survive. Whereas I guess my point is, if you feed the concepts that I'm speaking about, which are focusing on the silver linings, allowing yourself the frustrations, of course, I'm not overlooking that, but focusing on the silver linings, focusing on the joys, focusing on the wisdom that comes your way by nature of having a challenge and your opportunity to teach others, then that stays alive, and those sides grow, and those are the things that become stronger. Food for thought. Couple questions. Let me take a drink. Question number 3. Do you think, and this is the last time I'll ask before I read these 2 questions. We have 2 more questions, but if anyone else has questions, please throw them up there right now. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'd be happy to address any thoughts or reactions that are on your mind. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment too, I suppose. Question number 3, do you think telling a boss about your CMT is wise? It's a very interesting question because I teach a class for young adults with Asperger's syndrome on workplace success, because people with Asperger's are often so socially awkward that they have a hard time keeping a job, especially one where they have to interact with other people. And I very proudly teach my students that they absolutely should communicate it to their boss and to their coworkers at the point of the interview and beyond, because to me it says a couple things. Number one, it says that you are confident and self-aware, and that is a quality that I think supervisors and bosses are impressed with. I think number 2, it helps them to understand going into it the realities of the situation. I've had jobs where I've had to let them know because there are going to be certain elements that I need support with, certain physical demands of the job that I might not be able to live up to completely, and I don't want that to be a surprise. I don't want to be hired under the impression that I can do something that I can't. I want to be hired because they know exactly what I can and can't do and hire me anyway. The other interesting vibe about that is I had a counselor apply for camp once, and we did a phone interview, and she showed up to camp. I hired her. She was great. She showed up to camp, and she was in a wheelchair. And I remember talking to her about it after, and I couldn't tell how I felt about it. Part of me felt kind of betrayed that she wasn't honest with me and gave me sort of a weird feeling about her. And then part of me thought, good for you. You don't make it part of who you are, and you leave it totally out. So I don't necessarily profess to have all the absolute answers, but my opinion, since you asked, is absolutely tell a boss or a supervisor about your CMT. Next question. You spoke about your girlfriend. How did she realize that you had CMT? That is a good question. She was a counselor at the camp where I worked a few years ago. The Easter Seals camp I spoke about. She was a counselor for 2 summers in a row there, and by the end of the second summer, I think we had found our feelings for one another, and she knew about my disability from the get-go because her first summer there, she was part of staff training, and like I said, I always share it with my staff in advance and in full disclosure. And then, you know, we worked at a camp. She has an older sister who has physical and some mental special needs as well, and so she kind of grew up sensitive in that regard. And also by nature of the camp that we worked at, most of the people all of the campers we were dealing with had various special needs. So I think when I met her, she was already sensitive, but I think it was just when greeted with the new opportunity on her side to date someone with a disability, she took to it beautifully, and has ever since. Next question. How do you deal with adults? I agree with you about being honest, but adults tend to stare more. I have Allard braces. Those are good braces, first of all. Second of all, I find that you have to take them as they come. Adults are funny people, man. I've had far more issue with adults over the years than I ever have with kids. I can tell you that much. And bottom line is that some adults that you choose to open up to are not going to handle it well. There are adults out there who will handle it in an immature way. There are adults out there who will handle it, many of them, with awkward silence and discomfort and not knowing what to say. There are a lot of different reactions you're going to get. The key is to focus not on their reaction, but on what's in your control, which is to share it. Share it, share it, share it. Even if they don't show you that they are receiving it well, I guarantee you at the end of the day they've received it in some form or another. So what's in your control is to open up to people. I deal with adults head on. That's how I deal with them. I say what's what. And the more I do that, the happier I am. Even if they don't deal with it well or can't handle honesty, that's not my issue. I just prefer to get right to the point. And if someone's staring, I tell them. If someone is staring, someone walks by me and stares, I don't stop them and tell them. But if I'm at the gym and someone's looking or whatever, I just tell them. I say, it's okay to look. Don't worry. These are braces. I have a thing called CMT. I explain it to them. 90% of the time, people are happier after I explain it to them. And they move on with better empathy and better knowledge. And that's nothing but a good thing. Last question. Do you think much about the possibility of a miracle cure from new research being done by drug companies? It's a very interesting question to close on because I did a writing piece for the CMTA Journal a couple years ago, and as part of that piece, I said something along the lines of, if a genie came to me tomorrow and gave me the possibility to go back and not have my CMT, I wouldn't take it. I honestly wouldn't. I think CMT has given me more than it's taken away from me. Does that mean I enjoy the experience of CMT every day? No. I do not. I do not like losing my balance. I do not like tripping for no reason. I do not like braces. I do not like having hands that can't button a button or pick up a quarter off the ground. I do not like any of those things. But I think that I'm aware that the value of the wisdom that having that struggle and going through that struggle has given me is so much higher than the detriments that, I think it would be nice to cure it. I don't question that. I'm in full support of the work that Dr. Shai and the doctors around the world are doing, and the STAR initiative is profound compared to other initiatives like it. We have amazing people working for us, and I hope that they cure it, and I hope that future generations don't have to deal with it. But as long as I have it, I'm at the point in my life now where I think, no, I'm not looking for the miracle cure. I think that I was gifted an ability to go through this challenge and then to teach others as a result of that, and that's something I embrace as much as possible with a smile. To summate to you, I just want to remind you what I reminded you of in the beginning, which is that I don't take lightly the idea of so many of you taking time out of your day to listen to my thoughts about this. It's humbling to me, and it's just such an honor and privilege to have this chance to share thoughts with you, and hopefully inspire you to go and share thoughts with others. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me, and I want to encourage you, please, to reach out to me. You can get my information from the CMTA. You can find me on Facebook. Holler at me anytime, and I would love to chat with anyone who has something they want to chat about, or if anyone just needs an understanding ear at any time, or want support in talking to your kids, or anything that I could do to support you or help you, please let me know, because it would be a joy. I'd be thrilled to help. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks very much, Jonah. I really appreciate the hour long. I think it was excellent. Everybody, thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again next month. Take care.